Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to learn about monarchs and milkweed and migration as the name of this event. We're excited to talk about it. My camera's being a little glitchy, so I'm actually just going to turn my video off to make sure I can get through this introduction without it freezing up. My name is Danielle Moser, and I'll be your MC for tonight. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager for Oregon Wild, and we are a state-based conservation organization that works to protect and restore Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters. I'm honored to introduce our very special guest for tonight, Sarina Jepsen. Sarina directs the Xerces Society's Endangered Species and Aquatic Program. Since joining the society in 2006, Sarina has worked on the conservation of diverse, at-risk North American invertebrate species, including bees, butterflies, beetles, and freshwater mussels. In 2017, after nearly a decade of science-based advocacy work by Sarina and her colleagues at Xerces, the rusty-patched bumblebee was protected under the Endangered Species Act, which was the first bee in the continental U.S. to receive such protection. Sarina has authored multiple publications on the conservation of endangered pollinators and other at-risk species, and developed management guidance for federal agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're very excited to hear from Sarina. But before I turn it over to Sarina, I do want to take a moment to offer gratitude to the land itself and for those who have lived in what is now known as Oregon since time immemorial. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the land today. The history of tribes in Oregon is complex and nuanced and includes many colonial legacies and wrongdoings, like forced removal, that have had long-lasting and current impacts. It's important to not only acknowledge Indigenous people and land, but continue to do meaningful work by supporting them in the present, respecting and uplifting tribal sovereignty, and taking action. So please visit our website for additional educational resources and ways to get engaged and support important tribal work being led by the tribes.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle, for having me. I am delighted to be here, and it's really nice to spend the evening talking with all of you. Okay, so I'll be talking about monarchs, their migration, what they need, and efforts to protect and restore them. I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We're a nonprofit wildlife conservation organization dedicated to protecting invertebrates and their habitat, and we've been around since the 70s. Founded initially as a butterfly conservation organization, a society of butterfly scientists, but we since have broadened our mission to work on a wide variety of other invertebrate species. And some of the strategies we use, we conserve at-risk species, we run several community science volunteer projects, we engage in habitat restoration, and we advocate for pesticide reduction. Yeah, this is just the outline of what I'll be speaking about tonight. Basic ecology and life history, monarch population status, the recent Endangered Species Act proposed listing, threats to monarchs, and solutions. This is a map of the monarch butterfly migration in North America. Monarchs overwinter in two places, primarily. We have a much larger population, primarily from the eastern US, that overwinters in the mountains of central Mexico. And then we have a smaller western population that, for the most part, overwinters along the California coast. And then monarchs have multiple generations during the year, and they spend those generations breeding throughout almost the entirety of the continental US and into southern Canada. So laying eggs on milkweed, having those caterpillars hatch, grow up. When they become adults, they fly a little further north, a little further into the interior of the US, and continue that process for many generations until the last generation in late summer turns around and heads back to overwintering sites either in central Mexico or California. So tonight I'll largely be addressing this smaller western population that for the most part overwinters in California, although there is some mixing between the populations. But the monarchs that you would see in Oregon are spending, or their progeny are spending, either them or their progeny are spending the winters on the California coast or the coast of northern Mexico. Okay, so monarchs lay their eggs on milkweed. They're in the egg stage for 3 to 5 days. And those eggs hatch into tiny monarch caterpillars, the larval stage. Those larvae go through successive instars where they molt, each one being a little bit larger. There's 5 instars, and that until finally that largest caterpillar becomes a chrysalis. The chrysalis stage can last for anywhere from several days to weeks. And then the adult butterfly emerges from the chrysalis and finds a patch of milkweed on which to lay its eggs and repeat the cycle all over again. And mate, sorry, I forgot, mate before it lays eggs. So what do monarchs need? They need breeding and migratory habitat throughout their breeding range. So that's milkweed for caterpillars. That's the plant that the caterpillars feed on exclusively. Adults also use the milkweed for nectar, but they use a wide variety of other flowers for nectar as well. Monarch butterflies are considered generalist butterflies, where they will consume nectar from a lot of different plant species. They're considered generalists as far as nectaring goes, although there do seem to be certain plants that they prefer over others. And then for the overwintering life stage, which is from late fall to late winter, they need forested groves with the suitable microclimate and some nectaring resources to feed them and maintain their fat stores to get them through the winter. They tend to select sites that have protection from wind and in geographic areas that are buffered from freezing temperatures. So in that coastal microclimate in California. And then of course, they also need protection from pesticides. We have 4 different species of milkweed in Oregon, and they occur in a wide variety of habitats, from grasslands to river canyons, along roadsides, in wetlands, people's yards. They're widespread across the landscape in certain areas, but also can be quite sparse. Pictured here are some habitat suitability models. This is a project we worked on with Fish and Wildlife Service and Tom Diltz at University of Nevada, Reno a few years ago, actually. And on the left here, we have monarch breeding habitat suitability. We have milkweed habitat suitability. So the red areas are the areas most suitable for milkweed. In the middle here, we have suitability for adult monarchs based on known records of adult monarchs. So these red areas are the areas most suitable for monarchs. And then on the right, we have monarch caterpillars, eggs, and chrysalises, where those records are from, and models of the areas most suitable for breeding monarchs. So this has been a tool that many have used to guide protection and restoration efforts across the West. As I mentioned previously, the overwintering sites are pictured here as green dots, and they are largely, for the most part, really close to the Pacific Ocean along the California coast. In Mexico, the overwintering sites are in the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve in the mountains of central Mexico and primarily the state of Michoacan. And they're much larger. They host a much larger population of monarch butterflies. Okay, monarch population status. We run the Western Monarch Count, in which volunteers, we coordinate volunteers who collect individual estimates of monarchs at overwintering sites that gives us an annual population estimate for the entire Western population. And this effort has been going on since 1997. It's community powered, and it's a way to track Western monarch butterflies as well as their habitat. We have volunteers out tracking conditions of the habitat, alerting us and others when sites are slated for development or when there are other risks to sites. There are 3 monitoring periods in the Western Monarch Count, and we train volunteers. We have standardized protocols. We vet the data. It's a really tricky process. Here is just an illustration of how someone would come up with an estimate of how many butterflies are in this one cluster. And the estimate's 302 with each dot marking an individual monarch. It's a little bit like estimating jelly beans in a jar, but we do have standardized ways to do that so that there's some uniformity amongst estimates. We have counts in the early season, mid-season, and late season. And we typically report the mid-season count, which is, which has always been the highest, as the population estimate for the year. So this year, our mid-season count, it was formerly called the Western Monarch Thanksgiving count because it occurs over the Thanksgiving holiday. We counted less than 10,000 monarch butterflies, which is the second lowest count on record across more than 250 overwintering sites. We had more than 400 people participate, and this is just a graph since 1997 of the population data. And this is kind of the main way that the Western monarch community, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Xerces, and others tracks how the population is doing. So you can see this very tiny bar at 2024, which is our 9,000 butterflies. It's the only year in which we had a lower count was in 2020, when we had less than 2,000 butterflies, and that bar doesn't even show up on the graph. But luckily, the population did bounce back. The following 3 years, we had some really nice, favorable climatic conditions, and so fingers crossed, we're hoping for the same with this year's Western population. And we do have some earlier estimates of monarch butterflies at overwintering sites, not a coordinated large-scale effort like the Western monarch count, but we do have some estimates from the 1980s and the early 1990s from individual large sites over the years. And Cheryl Schultz and Elizabeth Crone have analyzed these older estimates, and in a population viability analysis study that they did, they estimated that we had monarchs in the millions in the Western population in the 1980s, anywhere from 1 to 10 million monarchs in the 1980s, compared to our, typically we have around 200,000 or 300,000 monarchs overwinter, and this year have just 9,000. We typically have a large drop between the mid-season and late season, and usually between 40 and 50% over just a period of a few weeks. And that is concerning to us. We suspect there's high mortality during this time period, with the temperatures being cooler, and this is one reason that we work on overwintering habitat restoration, because of these drops in the monarch population that we think may be largely due to mortality over the season. We don't know why this winter had such a low population, but there were record heat waves this year, drought, and then butterflies are bouncy. Like other insects, they're very tied to temperature, rainfall, host plant availability, which can fluctuate a lot from year to year. And so it's not terribly unusual to see large changes from one year to another. In the eastern US, they estimate monarch butterflies a little bit differently. As I mentioned before, it's a much larger population, and they estimate monarch butterflies by the number of acres occupied, as monarchs just completely will cover the trees in Mexico. So this last year they had 4.42 acres occupied, which translates to roughly 38 million monarchs, compared to their high year in the late 90s, which was an order of magnitude more, at around 384 million monarchs, or almost 45 acres occupied. Beyond monarchs, we have recent evidence that a lot of other North American butterflies have concerning population trends. So this is a study that came out very recently, came out this year, led by Cheryl Schultz. The lead author on this study is Colin Edwards, but this is Cheryl Schultz's project. She's at Washington State University. And a team of researchers, including some of my Xerces colleagues, analyzed millions of butterfly records from dozens of monitoring programs across the US to look at population trends across species and trends in butterfly abundance. And they concluded over the last 20-year period, since 2000 to 2020, there's been a 22% decrease in the total number of butterflies over that time period. So the total butterfly abundance in these studies. They found that far more species have declining trends than stable or increasing trends, although there are some butterfly species in both of those categories. And this is just a list that shows in the bottom part, which is most of the figure, it shows 38 of the most severely declining butterflies, with the ones declining the most at the very bottom. And as you can see, if you're looking for the monarch butterfly or Danaus plexippus, it didn't make this list of the top 38. It doesn't mean that it's not declining. I just showed you the population trends. I think I just wanted to point this out. It's the monarch butterfly is probably our best studied butterfly. It's the only butterfly I'm aware of with a continent-wide distribution whose populations are estimated in totality every single year and have been for decades. So I think we know a lot about the monarch's decline, but I also think it's a poster child for a lot of butterflies and probably a lot of insects as well. There are a lot of other species that are faring far worse. Okay, so this year, this December, we had an Endangered Species Act proposed threatened listing. So this was following a petition submitted by Xerces, Center for Biological Diversity, Center for Food Safety, the monarch butterfly researcher, Dr. Lincoln Brower, who has since passed away, but was very much behind this effort, submitted a petition over a decade ago in 2014. In 2020, the species got a warranted but precluded by higher priorities finding. And then in 2024, finally, a decade later, the Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to list the species as threatened with a 4D rule, which allows for all sorts of things, but also provides the protection of the Endangered Species Act. So when the listing was proposed, a public comment period was initiated, and that period has since been extended to May 18th of this year. So that public comment period is currently open. Under normal circumstances, we would anticipate a final decision to be published in the Federal Register 12 months after the proposed listing, and then the regulations would take effect 30 days later. This 4D rule provides for many exemptions, some routine agricultural activities like ranching, haying, and plowing, vehicle strikes, handling, netting, and some small-scale captive rearing is allowed. A key factor, though, in this proposed threatened listing, pesticides are not addressed, but they are identified as a key threat to monarchs. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has asked for public comment on how to address pesticides. And I think perhaps one of the most valuable parts of this proposed listing, and especially once it becomes final, is that with this listing, the Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to designate critical habitat for some of the California overwintering sites. So we know of more than 400 locations on the California coast where monarchs overwinter, but there are 62 sites that are included as critical habitat, and they include all of the really large sites, the sites that over the last decade or so have hosted a lot of monarchs. The critical habitat covers 4,395 acres. And it doesn't change access or land ownership, but it does provide an extra layer of legal protection to these sites. If you want to learn more about this listing, you can go to fws.gov/monarch, and I've included some other links here as well. Okay, so what are the threats to monarchs? Why have they declined, and what's needed for their recovery? I'm going to bring you back to this map that I showed you at the beginning. I think our approach to conserving this species of butterfly is to really consider when and where monarchs are most vulnerable in their life cycle. So the research to date and the evidence to date that we have suggests that there are 3 time periods that are the hardest for this butterfly in the West, for the Western population. That's the winter, the overwintering period, where we see oftentimes a 50% drop over the course of the winter in the size of the population. The early spring breeding area, we think there may be, we think monarchs are leaving overwintering sites earlier, potentially due to climate signals. This is a hypothesis, but due to warming climate, we think they're leaving earlier. There's anecdotal evidence of that before milkweed is actually up. So they've left these protected microclimates. And we think they're getting hammered in the really early spring, like February to April. And the population crash in 2018 was associated with really low numbers of early spring. There is some spring and summertime monitoring that happens, and it did tie that really low year to that early spring time period. And then also in the late summer, the population crash this year is tied to the late summer time period from monitoring that happens during the breeding season. And again, this is monitoring work that Cheryl Schultz at WSU and Elizabeth Crone at UC Davis are engaging in. There are a lot of stressors at overwintering sites. They are largely along the California coast, which is really high value real estate. So there are a lot of threats from development. A lot of sites are monarchs use both native and non-native trees. There are a lot of eucalyptus trees, which are a non-native and species that is often actively targeted for removal. It was planted widely in the early 1900s and can pose a fire risk. A lot of these groves are aging. They also will overwinter and do overwinter in native trees like Monterey cypress and Monterey pine. But there are a lot of issues with the eucalyptus at overwintering sites. A lot of these sites are affected by drought and storm, some by wildfire. And then there's a lot of work to remediate and protect habitat and people's houses from wildfire. And so there's a lot of forestry operations and tree cutting by utility companies and in rights of way. And so a lot of overwintering sites are getting destroyed just as part of the wildfire risk management. And then there's been traditionally, although this is starting to change, a real lack of active management at overwintering sites, often a lack of awareness. The butterflies are kind of camouflaged. And so a lot of sites, folks don't really know about their habitat value to the butterfly. And some knowledge gaps about how to effectively restore overwintering sites, I would say, is also a challenge. We have more than 400 overwintering sites. Of the 50 highest number sites, more than half of them are publicly managed. And restoration plans exist for a few sites, but most sites are still not actively managed for monarchs. We know that over the past 30 years, more than 60 sites have been completely destroyed, and we continue to lose sites every year, even on public land. And I will say the Bureau of Land Management cut down an overwintering site this last winter. We've had state parks cut down sites, and not to, I'm not trying to throw any agency under the bus, because both of these agencies do amazing things for monarchs and have, but just to point out that just because a site that's of high value is on public land doesn't mean that it's protected. So this is also why the critical habitat designation will be so important. One of our largest sites is on private land right now, and is threatened by a mansion development. And overwintering habitat, it generally lacks protection. There's some limited protection to some of the sites afforded by being within the coastal zone, but often that protection is not known or not well understood. And so functionally the sites are not protected. We do see habitat loss from all sorts of factors. One is conversion of grassland to cropland. We know we don't have real strong evidence that milkweed is limiting across the West, that loss of milkweed is leading to a monarch decline in the Western states, but we do have some anecdotal evidence that it may be limiting early on in the season in the Western US, like from February to April, largely when monarchs are in the interior of California. Nectar resources may be more limiting in the early spring, late summer, and winter. So in the eastern US, the decline of monarchs has been largely tied to the use of the herbicide glyphosate, also known as Roundup, among other trade names, and the increased use of herbicide-resistant GMO crops. Well, that's been thought to be a major driver of monarch decline in the east, but evidence that monarch declines are linked to not enough milkweed in the west is less clear. We have also had really significant increases in a wide variety of insecticides, but especially some systemic insecticides, and including the neonicotinoids. So this is just one of the neonics, metacloprid, and just showing its increased usage between 92, 2002, and 2014. And I'm showing you a slide from 2014 because that's the last year in which they collected data on seeds treated with neonics. And so estimates, and this is through the USGS National Pesticide Synthesis Project, estimates of neonic application after 2014 are likely gross underestimates because they don't include any of the seed treatments, which is a huge part of their use. And this is just one of several compounds. We did a study with researchers from University of Nevada, Reno, published by Chris Halch, looking at milkweed contamination, first in California. And so we sampled within agricultural settings, at wildlife refuges in urban areas, homes, and from retail nurseries in California. And we had these milkweed plants screened for 260 different pesticides. Our results came back, 64 different pesticides were identified in milkweeds from all of these different landscape types. We found that all plants were contaminated. The agricultural and the retail nurseries had the most compounds and the highest levels. But of those compounds that we found, we only have information on monarch toxicity for 4 of them. And those are the neonicotinoids. So of those neonicotinoids, about a third of our samples exceeded the LD50s, or the lethal dose of 50% of the population. So 32% of those samples had rates that would kill half of a monarch population. For all of the other compounds, we don't have data specific to monarchs, but we did have 79 instances where lethal doses for bees, like for the honeybee, how the testing's done, there were exceedances for 79 of those. So just a couple of the compounds that were particularly concerning, we identified chlorantraniliprole in 91% of our samples. 26% of them exceeded the Monarch LD50, and 78% of them exceeded the Monarch LD10, or what would be a lethal dose for 10% of the population. Another insect growth regulator, methoxyphenazide, was identified in almost all the samples, 96% of the samples. We don't have monarch toxicity data on this one, but we know this compound is used to kill butterfly and moth pests, lepidopteran pests. And in urban yards, one of our coworkers, a lot of Xerces staff helped out with this study, where insecticides hadn't been applied for 6 years. Fipronil was detected at very high levels in that yard. So there's movement of compounds, or compounds are sticking around for a really long time. In the retail study, 6 to 25 pesticides were detected per sample. And even some of the plants that were labeled as bee friendly, or we don't spray neonics, contained dinotefuran and thiamethoxam, which are both neonicotinoids. So people buying milkweed maybe to help save monarchs could actually be poisoning them if they're buying milkweed that is grown with systemic, long-lasting compounds. Our pesticide team, who was engaged in this last study, also did a follow-up study to the retail nursery where they sampled nurseries for milkweed across the US in all these cities on the map, shown on the map here, and found that contamination of retail milkweed plants is really common, including those labeled as wildlife friendly. So they sampled more than 200 milkweed plants across 15 states, found 61 of the 92 pesticides they were looking for in every plant, and in 38% of the plants that they tested, they exceeded levels that we know are sublethal to monarch, mostly due to fungicide contamination, actually. So I mislabeled this slide. I should have put insecticides and fungicides here. Climate change is also a stressor and something we're worried about. There's a potential mismatch in the springtime with monarchs leaving overwintering sites before milkweed has come up on the landscape. Also drought effects on overwintering sites, as well as on nectar resource availability in late summer. Wildfires pose a real risk. The pictured here is Lower Topanga Canyon, one of our overwintering sites that burned in the LA wildfires this year. And as I mentioned previously, just extreme heat, and that may be tied to lower populations like we saw this last winter. And then lastly, just the other kind of threat category is one of pathogens. And I think there are some risks to planting non-native tropical milkweed if you're close to overwintering sites. In terms of spreading, there's some limited evidence that pathogens can build up on non-native milkweeds in a way that they don't build up on or in populations of monarchs breeding through the winter time on non-native milkweeds. These non-native milkweeds don't tend to die back like the native milkweeds do. And so that allows these pathogens to build up, and there's a concern that they could be spreading higher pathogen loads to the overwintering population that's not breeding on this wintertime milkweed. And there's also a risk of increased pathogen spread with captive rearing and releasing of monarchs. Okay, so that's all the bad news, all of the stressors that monarchs are facing. And now I get to talk about some solutions and opportunities that there are to engage. There are so many ways to be part of the solution to protect and restore monarch habitat, breeding and migratory habitat, especially here in Oregon and throughout the West, and in California, overwintering habitat, reducing risk from pesticides, participating in community science, advocating for monarchs and other insects, and when possible, thinking about your food purchasing choices and supporting farms that are using fewer pesticides where possible and when and if affordable. We have a lot of active work with many partners, state partners, federal partners, and private landowners to restore overwintering habitat. And this is certainly one of the solutions, to replant native trees, even replant some eucalyptus, and really work on managing these habitats for monarchs. We're also engaged in a fun, I just threw the slide in, a fun research project that I wanted to tell you about because it's neat, in which we're using these brand new solar powered ultralight radio tags. And on the top left, you can see one glued on a monarch thorax to try to use radio telemetry to better understand how monarchs move within overwintering sites and among overwintering sites. To by understanding that, we hope to be able to better restore the overwintering sites and learn more about how they're using the habitat, and have that directly inform some of our restoration planning. Okay, there's also an opportunity to create monarch habitat. What is high quality habitat? What do they need? And I mentioned this previously. They need milkweed, flower nectar, protection from pesticides, protection from pathogens, and there are some other features, and this is a new area of research, but features such as shade and areas for perching may also be important. We have a habitat kit project that actually we've just recently launched in Oregon to provide free plant materials to projects to restore habitat. So we We only purchase plants that haven't been treated with pesticides, native plants, and we distribute them to key partners. Our habitat kits support a wide variety of species. We have some that are specifically focused on bumblebees, but support other pollinators as well. Those are our Washington habitat kits, many that are focused on monarchs, especially in California and Oregon. And all of them are looking at supporting other declining species where possible with the plant lists and, given the location of the kits. So we're trying to address barriers to habitat creation, like cost of materials, uncertainty about what species to plant, lack of access to nurseries, and lack of technical knowledge. So we provide kits for a wide variety of landscapes, different regions, different project types on public lands, working lands, urban gardens, schools, tribes, natural areas, and we support community-oriented projects, especially those for under-resourced or underserved individuals and communities. So in Oregon, we launched this project in 2023 to benefit monarch butterflies and other native pollinators. And in 2023, in 2024, we provided habitat kits in the Willamette Valley and the Klamath-Siskiyou ecoregion. We've worked with nurseries to offer these native plants and develop plant lists that include milkweeds as well as nectar plants that monarch butterflies and other pollinators use. We've got a wildflower kit, a riparian kit, and a hedgerow kit. And as I mentioned earlier, a wide variety of partners can apply for and receive these plants. These are just some pictures of folks that have received habitat kits in Oregon, and our sponsors, our funding sponsors for all of these plants. And yeah, our metrics to date, in Oregon, we've given out more than 12,000 plants across the western part of the state. And this is the link to apply for plants. We've just closed our application period for this year and actually are only offering kits in southwestern Oregon this year due to some changes happening at the federal government. But we are planning to offer kits both in the Willamette Valley and southwestern Oregon in 2026. So I put this link up here in case people listening have projects and are interested in applying for a kit. Also avoiding pesticides. I think simple steps, looking for organic plants and seeds, avoiding plants grown with the neonicotinoids, and being an advocate at your nursery, asking the folks working at the nursery if the plants have been treated, and that's sending the message that this is important. Also, another thing people can do is become a community scientist, Data collected through these projects can directly inform conservation strategies, conservation planning. One project that people in Oregon can engage in is the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. And this is a project to collect documented observations of monarchs, milkweed, monarch adults, monarch caterpillars, chrysalises, eggs, and milkweed. And all of that's used to really understand what are the most important breeding areas for monarchs in the West. We've got an iNaturalist project, and you can download the iNat app onto your smartphone and join the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper project. Also, if you have observed monarchs nectaring on blooming plants, you can log your observation into the Monarch Nectar Plant database to help improve guidance on what to plant for monarchs. And then I had to throw this in. I know this is not a bumblebee talk, but since we're in Oregon, I also just wanted to mention that we have a bumblebee atlas running in this state and 19 other states. And this is, we're going into our our 8th year of the Bumblebee Atlas in Oregon. And it's a great opportunity to look for bumblebees, take pictures, and contribute data to conservation. Can also advocate for monarch protection. As I mentioned previously, the public comment period is open. This link will take you to sign Xerces public comments if they are something that you agree with on the listing, on the proposed listing, or you can submit your own through the Federal Register. And again, you have until May 18th to submit public comments for this species. And then lastly, this is my last slide. I just wanted to mention a campaign that we have and that we've been working on for the last several years because we are here in Oregon. There are a handful of states, especially in the Western US, whose wildlife agencies don't consider monarch butterflies or really any insect to be wildlife, and therefore can't work to conserve them in the way that they would work to conserve salmon or wolves or any other species of conservation concern. So our state with the expertise to conserve wildlife. So we're really hoping this will change in Oregon. And I just wanted to bring this up as an important issue. We have seen really exciting changes in both Colorado and New Mexico. Those states were orangish red previously. New Mexico just gave its state wildlife agency authority to manage and conserve insects this year in the 2025 legislative session. And in Colorado, it just happened last year in 2024. And in both states, there was a really amazing grassroots effort of people that cared about monarch butterflies and other insects and contacted their elected officials and made this an issue. And we're really hoping the same thing will happen in Oregon. And with that, I just want to say thanks so much for listening. Here's my email address. Thanks to our members and supporters and the foundations and agencies and others that fund our work. And with that, would you like me to stop sharing, Danielle, or try turning my video back on?
Oh, I see you. Let's see if we see
Okay.
you. Hi, are
Would
we
you like
here?
me?
Are we glitchy? Yeah, you can stop sharing your screen. Maybe that will be one less thing that Zoom is trying to do at the same time. I did text our communications director, and he said that Zoom just incorporated AI. And when Google Meet did that, it definitely glitched it out. So somebody in the chat said, you know, thank you, Trump. And so I don't, it's not Trump's fault, but it's not however you feel about AI, there's definitely adjustments, and I think we just experienced one during this webcast. So great. Well, Sarina, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I know I was definitely like, oh my gosh, like thinking about the don't just trust wildlife friendly certification. Especially it was very eye-opening. Okay, we have a lot of questions for you, so let's jump in. Okay, I've been trying to start some milkweed plants in Southwest Idaho and have difficulty in getting them to mature. Do you have any suggestions? I've started them by seed, then also transplanted small plants.
I mean, milkweed is notoriously hard to start from seed. Some of my colleagues have developed some milkweed propagation guidance, and I can, what's the best way? Can I put the link to that in the chat? Or no, in the Q&A, Danielle,
Yeah,
or
you can
send
do
it?
that. You can also, we send out the link, the recording, and we also, if there's additional resources, we share that with people.
Okay.
So you can just share it with me and I can share it with everyone.
I'll send you the link to the milkweed propagation guidance. Right. I know, like, once it's established, it's really weedy, at least with the species that I have in my garden bed. It took a long time to get established. I know we've done some trials with Asclepias speciosa, the showy milkweed, and I don't know if that's what you're working with in California with planting like the roots, like root chunks. And those have been really, really successful. And I would say just completely anecdotally, like I just have moved it around in my own yard that same way, like by digging up a root piece. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, here's another one. In Western Oregon, how many, in what area or what density of milkweed plants is estimated necessary to attract monarch butterflies?
I don't know the answer to that. And honestly, I don't know if anybody does. What density, you know what? I think that there is some research on that in the Midwest, but I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think there's any for the West. I'm sorry.
Yep, yeah. So maybe this person has a new research project before them. A few people just wanted to know, and you put it as the last slide, and we'll just make sure we include a link, but just wanted to know the document number and like for public comment for
Okay,
rulemaking for the listing for
the
Monarchs.
docket.
Yep,
Okay, I'll send that to you when I send you, right after I get off, I'll send
great.
you the docket number and the propagation guidelines.
Any possibility that the deceased declining monarchs have already laid their eggs? Question mark. That might have come in the middle of your presentation because this came at 6:30, but um I think there was curiosity that even if the monarchs themselves don't make it, have they laid their eggs? I think that's maybe the context for this one.
Oh, like in the overwintering generation?
I think so.
So the time period, like if we're talking about the overwintering, what we think is mortality, the population drop, in that time period, the monarchs aren't reproductive, so they typically won't mate during the overwintering season. There's always exceptions, but typically they're not mating during that time, and they're not laying eggs. For the migratory overwintering monarchs, I didn't really talk about the resident populations on the non-native tropical milkweed because they have a kind of a different story. But for the overwintering ones, they're typically not mated and not laying eggs, and they won't do that until it warms up, like in February. Usually around Valentine's Day is when you see them start to mate, and then after that head out on the landscape to find milkweed and lay eggs.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I feel like there's a number of species that mate around Valentine's Day, which is fascinating. Okay, I'm gonna butcher the scientific Latin names here, but somebody was asking about the dip of how did you say it? Asclepias tuberosa and speciosa on my property, and they were asking, is one better than the other for attracting monarchs? I'm sorry for all the scientists in the
Right.
audience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there have been some milkweed preference studies looking at a wide variety of different species. I don't know I don't know if one is better than the other. I know some have higher cardinalides for protecting monarchs. Some are more palatable, but yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We're getting deep into gardening
I can
questions.
find it. Yeah,
Thank you everyone though for wanting to plant milkweed and to support monarchs. Okay, here's one about what are the roles of monarchs in our ecosystem?
yeah, good question. They're notoriously poisonous, right? They've got the bright coloration, morning coloration, and they sequester compounds, which I didn't even talk about. But they sequester cardinalides from milkweed, which makes them toxic. And actually, Lincoln Brower, who was on the ESA petition, did some of the seminal research that a lot of people learn about in their basic biology class of the bird eating a monarch and throwing up and learning not to eat monarchs anymore. That said, a lot of animals and a lot of birds have still figured out how to eat monarchs. So they are a food source. They likely play some role in pollination, maybe in long distance pollination of milkweed. They are flower visitors. They're not, probably not as good of pollinators as a lot of bees, but certainly can play some role in pollination. Yeah, and yeah, I think those are the two big ones that I'm thinking of, but also really, I think just a source of wonder for so many people.
Yeah.
Not an ecosystem service, but if we're thinking about it that
way. Well, at least at Oregon Wild, we say that there's obviously like ecological keystone species, but we also talk about sort of social keystone species and the fact that there's some, to your point of like wonderment, and there's species that get people very excited, which then brings them into conservation and to learn more and explore about other species. So that's kind of how maybe to your point, like it's a social keystone species. Like people are generally pretty excited about them, which then hopefully opens the door to learn about all the other things too in biodiversity. Okay, do the solutions, I think from your solution slide, for monarchs also help other butterflies?
Oh, certainly, especially the habitat solutions. Yeah, and the, advocating for pesticide change. I think all of them help not only other butterflies, but all sorts of other pollinators and other insects that are associated with plants. So yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And with with the habitat kits that we put together, we may have milkweed in them and plants that are attractive to monarchs, but we're also looking at other declining species and in the region and adding in plant species like host plants for their caterpillars and things like that.
Yeah. Great. Couple questions about how to propagate milkweed seeds. So I think you've covered that. And yes. Oh, somebody wanted to see the state map again. I don't know if you can pull that up while I.
Sure. Can I share my screen again?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. This map?
Let's see. They
I
said
think
it,
this
they
is,
asked it at 6:49. So yeah, it was probably towards the end. Yeah, maybe this was the one. Was there another state map? I don't think so.
I think there were like the habitat distribution or habitat suitability models map, but that was a while back. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or was it the iNaturalist, like mapping? Was there one
The
specific to
mapper.
Oregon that you had?
I don't
No.
think that one was
No, no.
specific to
Okay, then
Oregon.
it was probably this one, which is
Okay.
interesting. And Sarina and I have been chatting about back to that other slide with the map. Just the different state endangered species acts and what some of them cover and what some of them don't, and just like to your point, this jurisdictional authority. And so yeah, I can assure people that Oregon Wild is also definitely looking at where are some of the weaknesses in our state ESA, and this is one of them for sure. So yeah, thank you for sharing that map. Oh, somebody else wants to know how large their milkweed patch should be. So maybe this is maybe a new research topic.
These are great. Yeah, these are great questions. I don't think we know for the West. Like yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think we know. And I know there's been interest in research to ask some of these questions, like how large, and is it better to have, a giant patch or a few separated patches? I'll see if I can dig up some research from the Midwest and follow up with you, Danielle, if
sure.
that's appropriate, to see at least the landscape's so different in the Midwest, but
Yeah.
we have a lot more research on milkweed and monarchs, like from people like Karen Oberhauser, who spent a career and had a ton of grad students, asking and answering questions like that.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. If you find anything, we will definitely include it. Let's see, I think I see two more questions. So one was also about how do we go about giving and advocating to give ODFW, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, authority to manage insects and invertebrates. And that's exactly what we've been chatting about. So in order to give ODFW that authority, it needs to be changed in the statute, in the law. So it would be an act of the Oregon legislature to amend the Oregon Endangered Species Act, in particular for being able to at least be able to list insects and then relating statutes that give ODFW that authority.
Yeah, we need to amend Oregon's definition of wildlife so that
Yeah.
it specifically includes invertebrates, because right now it does not. Specifically, it lists, the species they can work on, and it does include mollusks. So like ODFW does amazing work on freshwater mussels, for example, because they have authority over shellfish. That's specifically in their statute. But yeah, we need a
Good point.
definition change, and I think
Yeah.
and they also need money, right? They need a lot more funding to do what non-game wildlife conservation in general, and their job is already overwhelming, with the need. And so a legislative change would need to come with added funding so they can have staff people with expertise to do a lot of this work. And I think legislators need to hear from their constituents that this is a priority. So
Yep.
yeah.
More to come on that, hopefully. And then, just to that point, and to give a plug for what many of us are working on this legislative session, which is about dedicated funding for mostly non-game species conservation, which ODFW does not have a long-term funding source for that important work. So I'll also include that in the resources, but we're definitely asking people to email their legislators to sign our petition in support of what we call 1% for wildlife, which hopefully would have be dedicating long-term sustainable funding for conservation. So more to come on that. Okay, and then finally, I think this person wants to know how and kind of why are monarchs attracted to milkweed and how do they find milkweed plants?
Oh, good question. You know, I don't know if we know exactly how they find plants, like if they're detecting them chemically. That's a great question. Gosh, you guys are, I'm feeling very stumped on this. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
great question
so many
though.
wonders of nature. That might just be
Yeah,
one of those other ones. But yeah, if we find more information, we can include it in the
yeah.
resources. But thank you for that
I,
great question.
I know, yeah, over the last like decade and a half or so, there's been new research to that has helped illuminate how they migrate, like, and they do have little tiny sun compasses in their antennae. We still don't, it still is completely a wonder as to how they go back to the same trees 5 generations later, you know, cluster in exactly the same spot. Like, what is it about that
Yeah.
one spot? But we do know a little bit more about their navigational system.
Then their attraction to milkweed.
Yeah, but that's not milkweed. That's just how they migrate in general and go these really long
Right, right,
distances
right.
to
Yeah.
winter sites. Yeah.
Um, well, more to come on that, and we'll definitely include all of these things and how to take action to support monarchs in our follow-up email that will be sent out either tomorrow or Friday. So, and then we can post it when we post the webcast recording on our website. We can also include those additional resources. So, but thank you. Those are the questions. Thank you, Sarina. And thank you to the audience for bearing with us with technical glitches and slides not advancing and who knows what happened to our videos. But I hope you all learned something about monarchs. I definitely did. And thank you, Sarina, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And we'll see you all at our next webcast. So have a good night. Enjoy the sun.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.